Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Nerissa Bauer, behavioral pediatrician and CEO of Let's Talk Kids Health. I absolutely love bringing people together so that we can all talk about kids' health topics. And we all know that mental health is health. So I am excited to have assembled another powerhouse panel of guests tonight to help us talk through trauma in kids. What exactly is trauma? Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics defines this as a frightening or dangerous or violent event that poses a threat to a child's life or body's integrity. We know that it can result from community violence, the pandemic, natural disasters, terrorism, racism, domestic violence, and other family factors like parental substance use, divorce, separation, neglect, abuse, and all of this. We are 3 years past the start of COVID, and survey studies that look at mental health among our youth show that anxiety, depression, loneliness, stress, tension are among common symptoms that we face as pediatricians, family physicians, psychologists, therapists, and the schools. So without further ado, I'm going to quickly have my guests introduce themselves. They're going to state their name, what they do, and where they're calling in from, and maybe a reason why they decided to say yes when I reached out to them. And then we're going to launch into a conversation. And as always, do not be shy. Please say hi, yes, comment on anything that resonates with you, and jump in and ask questions at any point in time so we can have a conversation with you. All right. So if we can start with first, I'll start with Dr. Amy King.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, afternoon, depending on where you're from. I'm Amy King. I'm a licensed psychologist. I specialize in childhood trauma and building resilience in both primary care and education. And I'm here because anytime I have an opportunity to talk about kids and trauma, I want to show up for parents and families that support kids in this space. It's my passion and purpose.
Thank you for being here. Dr. Gretchen Pianka.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm a pediatrician. I live in Maine. I have 3 teenagers, and my passion in my practice has been to develop a way that pediatricians can offer broader and deeper resiliency parenting education. And I'm working on a book for the AAP about that. And I've just been noticing how anxiety in particular seems to be a post-pandemic thing that can be pretty debilitating. And so also very excited to be here and help support families, children, whoever needs assistance. So thank you for having us.
Thank you. Dr. Fred Dodini, if you can.
Hello. Yes, I live here in the Carmel, Indiana area. I practice primarily, I'm a family therapist. I work a lot with couples, family relationships, youth. I was the clinical director for an outdoor-based wilderness program for teenagers out in Arizona for several years. So done a lot of work with teens, and some of the issues we're going to be talking about tonight are very specifically relevant for that population. Married with 10 children and more grandchildren you probably want to know about. So I have a lot of personal experience with family life and parenting and all stuff to draw from. So pleased to join you this evening.
Thank you so much. And this is your first time joining us on a roundtable, so I appreciate you saying yes. Dr. Terry.
Hi, Nerissa. Thank you for having me. Always excited when you invite me to anything. I'm always going to be there. I am a general pediatrician practicing in Baltimore, Maryland. And really, I came into my passion of adolescents and young adults who suffer anxiety, depression. I feel like I have an untrained residency in adolescent mood disorders because that's really where my patients have gone to in the last decade. The majority of my patients are older, they're adolescents or young adults, and they keep coming back. I think my oldest patient is 26. And I say, you need to move on. But I think there is something about the connection with your pediatrician, which I'm honored to have, but I do tell them that it's time to go. So I coach young adults with adulting angst to help them thrive and go out into the world with confidence and resilience.
I'm so glad that you said yes to come on. So thank you so much. I have Alicia next on the screen.
Yes. Hi. So I'm here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and so I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I primarily focus on attachment issues that come from adoption or trauma. So I'm just super passionate about how we really do have the capacity to change the next generation through helping the current generation and their own attachment wounds. And so a lot of our clients are adopted and or they've experienced a lot of trauma, and that has impacted their ability to attach and in their relationships. And so we do work with people across the age ranges, all the way from as young as 2 or 3, all the way up into adulthood, and just be able to look at how attachment impacts them in their relationships.
Yes. And again, thank you for the work that you do, Alicia, here locally in the community. I'm so glad that you were able to join us tonight for your first roundtable event with me. So thank you for being here. And last but not least, Dr. Amy Shriver.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shriver. I am a pediatrician working in Des Moines, Iowa. And the reason I am here is much like Dr. Terry, when Dr. Nerissa calls, I will always come. This is my second roundtable. And the second reason that I'm here is because I learned so much from all of you. I've met some of you before on a roundtable, and I always take notes. I want to read your books that are coming out. As a general pediatrician, I want to take the science of ACEs and trauma and translate it into ways that my patients can really understand it and better. And now I'm spending more time working on early relational.
Oops.
I think there's a little bit of tech issues on Dr. Shriver's end, but she is doing a lot of work on early relational health. And she is a superstar when it comes to taking evidence and figuring out how to translate it into practical terms so that it's accessible to her patients. So hopefully we will resolve her issue there and she will be able to not be frozen, but we will continue our conversation. And so I wanted to kind of start off this conversation. This is so important. Given where we are now with 3 years since COVID, I'd like to open it up to my speakers about if you can help frame this conversation. What types of trauma are you currently seeing? I know some of you alluded to that in your introduction, but for the families and educators and just parents and community members who are watching this show and this broadcast, let's paint that picture. What are we all seeing? What are some of the common issues that you're facing? What are your families coming to you with? I think we have Amy back. Who would like to kick us off? Dr. Terry, let's do it.
Yeah, since I didn't see anyone else, I have this thing where I have to raise my hand if no one else. Yeah, if no one else does it, that's what I do. So please, somebody else raise their hand next time, or else my hand will trigger. So during COVID, a lot of isolation, lots of depression and anxiety, and that's really grown actually. Now I think even more anxiety has taken over as opposed to the depressive symptoms that we were seeing more during active COVID. So the kids who had anxiety were loving COVID because they didn't have to do social things. And so they really enjoyed that. But now they're back, and those kids are, in the beginning when schools just reopened, some of them were actually just terrified of going to school and getting COVID. So some people stayed home even last year. So I had some patients do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the kids who didn't have anxiety prior also have increased in, their angst about kind of everything, about the world, about illness, and some of the children have lost grandparents, and I've had some families lose like 2 grandparents on the same side, right? Because of COVID. So that's very tough. And the statistics are that suicide rates have gone up. And so also my patients who've had friends who have committed suicide have also risen. It's, I think, a really topsy-turvy world for our young adults at this time. And one of the most troubling parts is one of my very young elementary school patients we discovered during COVID while he was, being helped out by a neighbor, was actually getting sexually assaulted by the neighbor's same age son. So this is elementary school. And it was because you don't have the routine of school, so things don't come up, right? And you have these situations that are ripe for trouble and nobody catches on until kind of after the fact. And this child was being abused on a regular basis for at least a year. And the only reason it kind of came on was he started having lots of behavioral difficulties. He wasn't learning, so anyways, there's a lot of trauma, and that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Amy King, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think Terry's right. There's what she's also describing is vicarious trauma, right? So I think when I talk with medical providers and teachers, they've experienced trauma of just hearing of absorbing all of the things that kids and families have gone through in the past several years. And kids who typically would have access to the helpers in their life, right? Whether it's a preschool teacher or a provider or a high school teacher or a coach, didn't have access to the people that we know that when kids have those safe, stable, nurturing relationships really thrive, and they didn't have access to them either. So, I just came from a high school talking to them about mental health and transitioning into young adulthood. And we just are seeing a lot of delays. And a delay in a high schooler might look like not having an easy time with social relationships or unfamiliar with dating or just a hard time problem solving and advocating. And in little kids, it's things like behavioral dysregulation and having a tough time making friends or problem solving. So I would just say that if you have a child or you're working with kids that are what I would call pretty socially delayed right now or emotionally delayed, that's pretty normal because they just didn't have access to a lot of the same adults in their life they typically would have.
Yeah, I really appreciate you mentioning that because I know that for families who are dealing with trauma and seeing changes in how their child is acting or not wanting to do things that they would expect they should do, those types of things, it can be really stressful and concerning. And parents oftentimes don't know, how to even begin or where to begin. So thank you for helping to normalize that with your both of you for your open comments. I thought I saw Dr. Pianka raising her hand. Thank you.
Thank you. I was just going to validate what Amy was saying with the decision fatigue for the parents. Like normally there's like a whole bunch of people who are helping you with all these decisions and what's best for your kid and is he okay and is he doing well. But for that long stretch during COVID, it was all parents. And so parents also are anxious. So it's not just the kids who are anxious, but it's like multi-generational anxiety and everybody's feeding off each other. And for parents, it's just like, is this safe? Is this the right thing? Is my kid even okay? How do we get out of this? How do we get back to, normal? How do we get back to where I thought we were going to be when my kid was, 10 or 14 or whatever? So I think the parents, that kind of multi-generational support model too, like focusing on the kids, but also talking to the parents, because then when parents get anxious, sometimes they end up doing things they don't want to do, like yelling or, shaming comes out accidentally or something, but just because they're terrified. And so I think normalizing that for parents and saying, it's okay, this happens. And then how can we work through the parents, help the parents with their feelings? And one of my passions is the same thing for the kids and the parents. Everybody does breathing exercises, whatever it is, just teach everybody the same thing. There's no shaming, no separation. We're all struggling. So.
Yeah, no, I love that very much. So thank you for bringing that up. And I do know, if you don't know, Dr. Pianka has she's on TikTok and YouTube, so you've got to check out those videos. And she's a big proponent of making sure parents and kids are doing the same thing together. So, Alicia, I saw your hand.
Yeah, so I shared earlier that we deal with a lot of adoption and attachment trauma, and so it was really an interesting thing for us what we experienced during that time. One is that the losses that were experienced during that time triggered the adoption losses that they had experienced early on in their story, and so that triggered a lot of those stuff. And so those losses around school and relationships and social relationships, adults, teachers, that kind of thing. And so for some of our folks, they really took that really personal, and it triggered some pretty big trauma responses from a loss, rejection, grief standpoint because of what had happened to them in their past. So that was a really big deal for us. And during that time too, the opposite happened though too. We saw some families who really strengthened attachment during that time because they didn't have as much to do, and then got in the next few months after that, we're done with treatment. And so that was a really cool, unexpected thing that happened for some of our families, that they were actually able to lean into some of the things that we had been doing with them, but they were able to do that in a way more intensive way. And I think moving forward from then, and we even felt this during that time because of the clientele that we have, a great majority of our clients were dealing with so much anyways, that this was in a lot of respects a blip on the radar compared to what they were already dealing with. And so for a lot of our clients, that was very true for them as well, that this was just something else that was added on to the stress that they were experiencing because our adopted families deal with so much. So it was just an interesting time. And then moving forward to some of the things that have happened beyond that, like a couple of examples that I would say bring up is just, again, trying to process some of the loss and grief from COVID, but really for a lot of our people, other losses were much bigger for them from the standpoint of loss of birth family, loss of country, loss of racial identity, those kinds of things. So just trying to help them through that. But back to the school piece, like we are noticing that there's a school here locally that's saying that a great majority of their fifth graders, about to be sixth graders, are behind in reading. And so if you go back to when they were second graders at the end of, March 2020, and then you're going into third grade and to think about what they're supposed to be doing in third grade, like it makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I'm glad that you pointed that out. I mean, COVID really disrupted so much, not only in our personal and interrelationship sphere, but, with academics and all of that. But it's interesting that you point out that in that same time, there was some unexpected positives too that you were seeing as well. So thank you for bringing that to light, because I think there are several things that came out from the pandemic. We're talking about mental health. It's not as taboo, but we still have a lot of work to do. And that's why we're doing these roundtable events. And not just COVID, right? I mean, we still have a society that we have, racism and school shootings and violence in the community, and our families who are already stressed, and we're already stressed. I mean, it just is another layer on it, and it doesn't seem to end some days. So, we do want to acknowledge that even though it started with COVID, that there's always something happening that can be very stressful for our families and for us.
I was just thinking, if you're familiar with the Surgeon General's recent report, he talks about the explosion of loneliness and social isolation going on, and how social media, unfortunately, is contributing to a lot of that. And so during COVID, kids were relying on what they thought was the medicine for social isolation and loneliness. Actually was one of the things that's causing the illness to begin with. So they turned to social media and their phones and all that more and more as a social outlet and a connection. But unfortunately, as we see, it's added a lot more to their stress as well. I think I like the fact that I'm hearing more and more from parents who are saying, we're doing, tech holidays in our home. We're gradually weaning our kids off of some of this stuff and really focusing on one-on-one contact and interaction with their children. That's the kind of antidote to loneliness and social isolation that families need is not filling up more time with technology, but with one-on-one relationship building experiences with our kids. That has a whole lot more to do with their sense of identity and self-esteem than what they learn, from social media. So, it's a big challenge, and it's not getting any easier.
Yeah, I really do appreciate you bringing that up, Fred. I think that is an absolute thing that I think all of us are acknowledging. I think I saw a lot of people shaking their, like nodding when you were talking about that, because face-to-face time is the most important remedy for that connection and that ability to just connect with one another in person. I know that even though I was able to still continue seeing patients through telehealth during COVID, which was phenomenal, there is no substitute for seeing people in person. I mean, just having that connection and being in the room with them and being able to see everything that's happening, their facial expressions and their body language. It's so much better in person. And as humans, we crave that. We need that connection.
I'm really glad you said that. And also just to kind of piggyback on what Dr. Fred was saying, we as general pediatricians have a really good idea about what kids need for their social development in their teenage years, just as Dr. King referred to earlier. But officially, when we're trained, we're not trained to ask specific questions about social connections. Like, we have our heads, mnemonic that we use, and we think about, well, what are your activities? And activities is sort of a way for us to know how connected kids are, but there's no F for friends. And so I think that when we think about screening for what our teens need, we need to be asking more about friends, and we need to be asking more about connections in the home and connections with friends and connections through activities. Just like Dr. Fred said, being involved helps you create resilience. And so we need to make sure that all the general pediatricians out there have the language to explain why involvement in activities is so important for creating the resilience, for building the social and emotional health of our teens. But of course, there are a lot of barriers to that, financial being a big one in my patient population. But really just letting people know that there are more ways than being in, pay for play sports that can help build that resilience, but to really have that language built into the adolescent health visit. So I'm suspecting that a couple of you have chapters in your books about just such a thing.
Yeah. See? Yes.
I was just going to add to what Amy just said. Probably one of the most beloved things that I help pediatricians navigate is what we call the circles of support for children. And if we don't ask, we don't know. And relational health is one of the predominant predictors of long-term health. And so we should be asking new mommies, we should be asking young children, we should be asking latency age children, because if we look at those positive childhood experiences, look down the line, it's connection, 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 connection over and over and over. And so if we're not asking about connection, we're doing a disservice to kids and families. And like Gretchen said, not just for the kid, but for the parent too. Who's in your village? So I just think, I'm glad you said that, Amy. It's critically important for long-term health for kids.
So I heard Dr. King use the term positive childhood experiences. I'm going to have Dr. Pianka define what those things are. What does that mean? And how can we nurture those positive childhood experiences? Why do they matter?
So there was a study that came out in 2019. Actually, there's more legroom behind this specific study, but this is one that we kind of got to use as pediatricians and got all excited about because it kind of gave us some data that if you have these 7 positive childhood experiences, it can offset the long-term mental health impact of adverse childhood experiences. So for so long, we've been kind of looking at adversity and then just feeling hopeless, like what can we do, and monitoring for disease. But this gives us something that we can then start coaching families. Okay, there are 7 things that we know that these 7 things, if you can help foster this, and even if it's not all 7, even if you just have 1 or 2, then you can help offset the long-term impact of adversity. So there, the 7 things are feeling like you can talk about your feelings with your family, feeling like your family supports you when you're going through a hard time, feeling that you were protected by at least one adult in the household, feeling like you enjoyed community traditions, feeling like you belonged in high school, which I think is one of these things that's sort of cumulative and builds off all the other ones, feeling like your friends supported you, and feeling as though you had at least 2 non-parent adults in your life who took a genuine interest in who you are and how you were doing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I bet everybody's like thinking, okay, how many of these do I, how can we work on these things? But, what I love about what you said, I mean, I think for a long time when the ACEs study came out, from San Diego, the landmark study, and it first became something that pediatricians were like, wow, we definitely need to be monitoring for this. But you're right. It sort of got us thinking about, oh my gosh, there's all this doom and gloom. And we know that if you have 4 or more, that it sort of sets you up for higher likelihood of not only mental health, but physical health, negative physical health issues chronically. But then all of a sudden, this amazing, these studies are coming out saying that, and as pediatricians, I think it's really fun and fascinating to have the science now explaining, because we sort of intuitively knew that we need to nurture these connections, these safe, stable, nurturing relationships, but we can teach some of these skills. We can teach these in these primary care visits and really help nurture, observe, look for these positive factors, and really commend families for doing a good job in that, connecting, supporting, and just loving on your kid, and knowing that you can go to your pediatrician for that support.
So I know I talked before about, hey, can we do better screening for connections?
Yes.
And how, as a primary care doctor, we need to have these short little nutshell moments with our patients so that we can, meet them where they are, find out what's going on, and also, impart just little sprinkles of information on them, and until we can schedule them for a longer visit when we have more time. And so what I've been doing is what's called CC123, and I know we talked about it at a different roundtable, but CC123 is just a really positive way to talk to families about parenting during stressful times, and or just parenting because life is often stressful. And so, we talk about, hey, it resonated so well during the pandemic, but it still resonates today because people are still carrying the burdens of post-pandemic trauma feelings. So when you're stressed out, first you just start off by normalizing stress. And you're like, hey, stress is just everybody's life goes like this. And it's not just your mental health. Your physical health does that. Nobody's healthy all the time, except for that guy from the movie Unbreakable, but nobody else. And, everybody's financial health does that, and everybody's social and racial relationship health, so don't be surprised if your health goes up and down. Don't be surprised if your health is in a current down. If your health is in a current down, you have to own it, recognize it, see it, and then never go through it alone. That's always the first message. I give it to my patients, I give it to my family, I give it to my friends, I give it to my students that I teach. Med school is kind of stressful. But anyway, once you've established that stress is going to happen, you prepare and you find your first C, which is connections. And I wish that were easy to do for everyone, to have connections, but that's something to know about, to work on, to build. And, sometimes pediatricians have ideas for how to help you find connections. And then the second C is coping strategies. And I know I see everyone in here is an expert on how to help families build coping strategies. And so I don't always know all the answers behind that, but sometimes I drop a little hint that kids at least need routines as they go through coping. And then the 1, 2, 3 part is, hey, as a parent, when you see your child looking frustrated, looking sad, whatever the big feeling is, just take one moment Take one moment to like figure out why your kid's doing that, what is going on, what is the best approach to helping them. And then also take one moment for yourself as a parent, because people need to hear that parenting is hard. Parenting is so hard all the time. And so you just need to take the moment to forgive yourself, give yourself some grace. Anyway, then two is two eyes for seeing and two arms for holding. Like physical affection goes a long way when you're stressed. There aren't that many remedies for depression and anxiety, but in the moment, like physical touch can really work wonders. So just don't forget that that goes so far to help your child feel safe and feel loved and feel worthy. And then the three is, what are 3 ways you can show your child you love them every day? And that plays a lot into the positive childhood experiences. If you have someone who's, doing things, saying things, like spending time with you, whatever your love language is, that is something that where a child can feel the love, then that's building that resilience. And it's helping families reflect on, what can I do? What do I like to do? And when you ask an older child or a teenager this question, it is wonderful, the dynamic in the room to watch, because the child, let's say they're like 8, they're like, I bet I could help my mom. And then the mom looks and gets really excited and happy, because moms always want more help. And then there's just like a delightful kind of energy zinging around the room. And that's something that's so strengths-based that you can really build upon. It's not a remedy to anything, but it opens a conversation. It talks about that stress is real, and people need to feel seen. They need to feel that their stress is acknowledged.
I love that. And thank you again for bringing that up. I was hoping you were going to talk about your CC123, because it is so powerful, and you make it sound so easy to talk about in a few minutes, right? And I know that many general pediatricians, they're strapped for time. They're seeing a lot of patients. But what I love about that, it's so beautiful. You can incorporate that in just everyday conversation. It takes like 2 seconds. Well, not 2 seconds, but you know what I mean? It's very quick to talk about and acknowledge and bring up at each and every visit.
One of the other things, I appreciate what everyone's saying. Social connection is the key here. Building connections, that's how you build resilience. That has been shown to be protective with mental health for young adults, and there's been recent studies to support that. Here's the other thing, agency, building agency, helping your child build agency age appropriately. And so that can mean, that they can put on their clothes by themselves or tie their own shoelaces, solve their own problems, okay? And then you make that transition as they're going into young adulthood, how you're going to be the supporter. They don't need you to solve their problem. But here's the other thing. I'm so sorry. Volunteer. That's another way of building agency, right? Because they're looking beyond themselves. And if they can volunteer and help younger kids with a skill that they have, builds agency, builds confidence. And when do you feel best? As the giver or the receiver? Mm-hmm. As a giver, even more than a receiver, right?
Yeah.
So that's all.
Yeah,
I love that. That sounds like a lot like the 7 C's of resilience, kind of thinking about all of those C's, which I think about a lot, but can never remember all 7. So when Dr. Gretchen remembered all 7 things, I was like, oh, her brain, so wonderful to remember 7 things. But, when I talk to teens, I actually love talking about Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages of development in adolescence, because you can watch it happen in front of you, and it's just amazing. So if you feel like you know what to expect with their development, and you watch it happen and you talk about it, it's so fun to spend time with teenagers watching them develop. So like I had a couple 14-year-olds today in my clinic, and I'm like, so tell me what you're doing, kind of did the whole like what's going on at school, at home, and activities and everything. And I'm like, so do you know what your job is as a 14, 15, and 16-year-old? Your job is identity. You're figuring out who you are, and you're figuring out who you love, and you're figuring out what you want to contribute to society, and what you want to do with your life, and how you give back, and what your values and beliefs are. And the 14-year-olds are looking at you like, what? that's my job. And it's so funny because that is their job, and no one ever really explicitly tells them their job. It's very similar to my medical students who have 7 core ACGME competencies. And I ask all of the second and third years, do you know what the ACGME competencies are? And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. So that's the answer to what you're supposed to learn in med school. And nobody tells you that you're supposed to learn all that. So I'm trying to get better at that. But same with teens. What am I supposed to be doing with my teenage years? You're supposed to be discovering your identity through the agency of like solving your own problems and through the activities and volunteering that you're doing. And when someone explicitly explains that that's why you're doing what you're doing and talks about how it builds your brain up so well, I often will get so excited when I hear about someone playing the cello or in a play, or somebody who's going to play soccer next year. And we talk about the 7 ways in which that makes you a stronger human and really helps your adulting skills, especially my sporties. If you're playing sports, I'm going to be like, guess what? You're going to learn how to deal with disappointment, because you're going to lose sometimes. And that's hard. But if you get really good at losing when you're in middle school and high school, when you're an adult, losing happens all the time. So you're going to be ready. You're going to be ready for it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I love that framing. Fred, you were going to say something. Sorry about that.
I was just thinking, when I was at the wilderness program in Arizona, these teenagers would spend an entire 6-week period living very primitively out in the wilderness and connecting with nature. So we were always looking for metaphors from the natural world that we could use as teaching models and things to encourage kids in making, better informed decisions. And well, it's the theme for my book, Shine Brighter. I used the sun, the moon, and the stars because these are things kids were experiencing every day out there. And all I had to do is I could sit by a creek bed or on a mountaintop with a kid and say, look up, what do you see? The sun. Okay, what does it do? Well, it provides light, warmth, nutrition, and its gravitational influence on the earth benefits the earth. So the sun really exists to serve the earth. It provides light, it provides warmth, it provides nutrition, vitamin D. We need light, we need the sun for plants to grow and for photosynthesis, so the oxygen. And then it creates this beneficial relationship. The Earth's orbit is just the right distance from the sun for life to exist on the planet. And I was having a conversation with this 17-year-old boy from Beverly Hills who pretty much rejected his family's lifestyle, which was all Rodeo Drive and the Hollywood Beverly Hills community stuff. And he was pretty angry. And I said, some people are like that. They provide light in the form of wisdom, knowledge, life experience, warmth in the form of compassion and love, nutrition in the form of service, as you brought up, service to the bodies, the minds, and the spirits of all those around them. And these are positions in the world, their education, their wealth, their power, their positions of influence to guide other people's lives in a positive direction, something that benefits them, those other people, more than it does the person. And I asked that kid one time, do you know any sun people? And he said, yeah. And I asked him, how do you feel when you're around them? And he said, I feel good. I matter. I'm a person of value. I said, great. Well, what about the moon? What do we know about the moon? Well, the moon doesn't generate its own light, just what's reflected from the sun. So that means the moon is always half in the light and half in the dark. One side faces the sun, the other side faces away. And then during a lunar eclipse, it starts with a full moon, and then it gets smaller and smaller until the moon is totally in the dark, and then gradually relights again. And I asked this kid what causes that to happen, and he knew it's lunar eclipse. The Earth's orbit travels right between the sun and the moon and blocks the light of the sun. And I said, isn't it amazing that all we have to do is look up and we're reminded of a very important principle? Well, what happens in our lives when we let the world get in the way? If all of our focus is on those temporal kinds of things, about influence and wealth and good looks and popularity and entertainment and all that stuff, our focus isn't on others, it's all on ourselves. And those kinds of lives are really not very satisfying. And when I asked him if he knew any moon people, he said, yeah, I live with them. He wasn't too happy about his family's lifestyle. And I said, how do you feel when you're around them? And he said, insignificant. I'm not even here. If I don't bring something of value to their lives, they don't even see me. And that's why he was so angry. It wasn't just a lifestyle issue. It was about he had no significance, no identity in that family. And I said, what about stars? Do they provide much light? No, tiny pinprick of light in the night sky. What about warmth? No, they're way too far away. I said, star people are kind of the same way. Whatever light, whatever goodness, whatever love that's within them, whatever warmth is not, they don't value it much. So they really don't develop it and magnify it so they have more to share with other people. What they want is power, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. And so I asked that same boy, do you know any star people? And he said, yeah, you do not want to be around those people. They will hurt you. And I said, okay, you know. And I said, we're out here in the wilderness. Your parents aren't here. It's just you. It's you and nature. It's you and yourself. You get to decide what kind of human being you want to be, sun, moon, or star. I'm not going to make that decision for you. Your parents can't make that decision. Even God won't make that decision for you. You got to decide for yourself. And if you see the qualities that you admire and you respect and you want to be that kind of person, you'll attract other people like that to you. If you want to be a sun person, you'll attract other sun people. Moon people, star people, it's the same way. So I think empowering, our program was not a boot camp or anything like that. It was the opposite, really. It was all about using the natural world as a place to build confidence and resiliency. So kids could bring that attitude back home to what we call the wilderness of the world, back at school and back at home and back in their communities, and have that same sense of confidence about who they are and the kind of person they want to be in their communities. I think we're losing that sense. I mean, we emphasize individuality so much in Western culture. We kind of miss that community, connotation that it's much more popular in Asian cultures. We could do with a lot more of that, so we can find what it is that unites us rather than what divides us so much. Because kids we're splintering everybody off in such micro categories. You have to decide when you're a very young age, not just whether you're a boy or a girl, but where on that continuum you may lie, or what your value system is, your belief system, your political orientation, your social stuff. So much pressure that it segments kids' heads. And I think that's part of why they struggle with a clear sense of identity and purpose in life, is they're being pulled in so many different directions at the same time.
Thank you for that. I think Dr. King has something to add to what you just said.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to this conversation about trauma. And just as I know that a lot of the people, Nerissa, that listen to you are parents and families who are going through really tough times. And to just underscore that trauma becomes complex trauma or toxic stress when we experience it by ourselves over time. And so often what people do is the first provider or professional they go to are their pediatrician. So all of you on this call who are the primary care providers. And so I know that Gretchen has really strong opinions about stopping checking all the boxes as a pediatrician. I'd love to hear her say more about that. But I also just want to encourage the parents that are listening that you get to set the agenda too when you go in to see your PCP. And what's important to you might not be on the Healthy Families checklist. And so making sure that you're getting your needs met too, because of the stressors and traumas that you're going through. But anyway, Gretchen, I was wondering, I just love your perspective on stopping checking all the boxes, because it's really important.
Yeah. So so often when you go in for a well visit, or you go in for a checkup or a med check or something, we greet you with a questionnaire, and then the doctor or the medical assistant starts checking boxes and asking a whole set of questions. And then we as providers have a whole set of things we have to do. Like we have to make sure babies are sleeping on their backs and they have a car seat, and they're so there's so much information that we need, or we feel like we need to get to. But if the family is coming into the room and mom just lost her job and dad just is having trouble with the legal system or something, and Johnny just got kicked out of school, I mean, they really don't want to sit there and talk about car seats. If you want to have a meaningful conversation, you have to be able to greet the family where they are. And I'm interested in Alicia's take on that, because I think families who have a lot going on, sometimes what we do in the well visits and stuff can feel kind of irrelevant and frustrating. And I wanted to ask her, and then they wait to the last minute and your hand's on the door. And I always say, is there anything else I can help you with? And they'll say, well, if you can make him stop hitting his sister. And then you back the bus up, and then you get behind because you're like, well, what's going on? And then you figure it out, and your 15-minute visit is over, and then your medical assistant and your office manager are mad at you because you're behind. But that's sort of our days could be a little more efficient if somehow some people are doing wonderful work with doing this pre-visit planning, like Christina Bethel, who did that positive childhood experiences. She's passionate about getting all those questions done before you get in the room, so you can focus on what you really want to talk about as a family with your doctor when you arrive.
Mm-hmm. Alicia, do you want to jump in here? You got an invitation.
Sure. I think one of the things that we really pride ourselves here is just the ability to form really strong connected relationships with our clients. That becomes our number one priority from the beginning. And we really, I feel like it's just an important piece for us. And just a part of that is just us being able to role model ourselves, that we ourselves have the capacity to develop deep connected relationships with people in front of us, right? That we're modeling what that looks like, what that feels like, the questions that we're asking, the things that we're saying, that we're asking questions that maybe nobody else ever asks them. We talk a lot about honesty from the standpoint of vulnerability and what that actually looks like. And kind of like you guys already, a couple of you have talked about just normalizing stress and what that looks like. And I'll say a lot of times about, if they're getting ready to move from 5th grade to 6th grade, for example, like they should feel stress about that, especially if that's meaning going to a different school. That's normal. Okay, that's fine. You can feel stressed, just those kinds of things. But I think this connection and relationship piece just becomes so primary, and us being able to ask questions that really show that we care. And we really are interested in getting to know what's going on from the family systems approach of what that looks like. That, as you were talking about, Gretchen, like what dad is doing, what mom is doing, what Johnny's doing is impacting the entire family system. And we really are treating families that way. And some people come into our practice and they're like, whoa, we didn't know this is what we were signing up for. We thought maybe we were just going to drop Susie off and be like, see you in an hour. Like, nope, that's not what we're about here. We just are looking at the entire family and recognizing that everything is impacting them, what's going on around them.
Just because we are running out of time, I wanted to make sure that we talk about maybe some thoughts or strategies that you have for families and educators, because I know that a lot of schools, teachers are seeing these behaviors, these concerns, and they oftentimes are not sure how to handle, how to support, how to help collaborate with the provider, those on the team, and feeling quite alone. For the providers out there who are feeling burnt out, I know there's many awesome doctors who have been doing so much for their families and feeling that as well. So any words of wisdom from those standpoints? Yes, Dr. Amy, and then Dr. Terry.
I would love it if every parent who's listening, every provider who's listening, every teacher would make 2 columns on a piece of paper. And on one side of the paper, I want you to write down difficult behaviors. Okay. And I want you to just list them all down, whether you're a parent or a physician or a teacher. Talking back, disrespect, yelling, throwing things, lying, interrupting, whatever the case may be, just write them all down under difficult behaviors. And really take an inventory of what you're struggling with as a parent, or what a parent's telling you as a provider, as an educator, and take a look at that list. And then I want you to kind of cross off difficult behaviors at the top. And I want you to write down unmet needs or skills not yet learned. And on the other column, what I want you to write down is, if a child is lying, what's their behavior really trying to tell you? If a child is screaming and has a dysregulated mood, what is it that they need? What is it that the skill that they haven't learned yet? Because I know for sure that kids do well when they can, and parents do well when they can. So if there's something that's not happening, there's probably either an unmet need or a skill set that hasn't yet been developed. And once we begin to look at that and just shift the lens slightly, we become more compassionate. We become definitely what we would call more trauma informed, but we actually begin to lead from our heart and look beyond the behavior and begin to meet the need of that child. wherever he or she is in that moment. So that's just one little tool you can try right away.
I love that so much. I think, one of the things that I often will tell families is that it's really hard when there's a child who's melting down or doing the same thing and talking back and defiant. And it's hard for parents not to take that personally. But oftentimes taking a step back, becoming a detective and trying to understand, like, what is that behavior trying to communicate to me? Because right now that's the only way they can show me that something is wrong. But together we have to kind of figure out, what is that clue trying to tell me? How is that child's emotional mood state? And what are some of the skills that they haven't yet developed? So thank you for bringing that up. It is so important. And it's important mind shift, to happen so that you can begin to face recurring issues or big issues head on without feeling overwhelmed, and sort of take a different approach to that. Alicia, you unmuted it.
Yes, so I was saying earlier that I'm a TBRI practitioner, and what that means is a trust-based relational intervention practitioner. And so what you talked about, Amy, is just this part that we go at from here, is that when we're looking at how do we build a trust-based relationship with one another, is that we first need to understand what are our unmet needs, and what are those behaviors telling us about it. And what you said, Dr. Bauer, is so important, and what we do a lot here, especially in the initial part of treatment, that people are like, whoa, is the part about, like, I don't really care about the behaviors. I do want to hear about them, but I don't really care about them. What I want to hear is, what are some unmet needs, and what are we going to do to meet those needs? And when they start talking about behaviors, like, whoa, what are the unmet needs about that? We're going to keep backing up. We're going to keep backing up and empowering them to be able to see what their child needs so that they can respond from that. The trick is, or the hard part is when we're also working with families whose parents haven't ever had their needs met as a child either. So we're asking them to meet the needs of their child when they themselves have not been trained, so to speak, to even know what needs are of other people, let alone themselves. And so that becomes a big work in terms of us of really kind of looking at, what do we need to do for parents and helping them first before we can even treat their child. But a lot of work for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with TBRI is the work of Dr. Karen Purvis and Dr. David Cross out of Texas Christian University, and looking at their work and the things that they've done and what research tells us about trust and relationships and connection and attachment. There's just a lot of things to learn from the research that they've done over the years there.
I'm just looking. Yep. Dr. Terry?
Yeah, I can't agree with what Amy and Alicia have said more. I think it's so important to, I like to reframe. That's what I use a lot with my families. So what's the situation here with your child or your young adult, right? And you know what? They can tell you if you give time. So instead of, pouncing them with questions, and be okay with the pause and the silence, and it will come out of them, right? Not your toddler who's having a tantrum and who's having the worst meltdown, but I'm talking about a little bit older elementary school kids, and then adolescents and young adults. You have to model the fact that it's okay for you to sit in silence together. And when you're ready, I'm here for you. I'm here to listen. And, starting conversations with teenagers and young adults, asking them if you can give advice. So one of the things is this a conversation where you want me to just listen for you? You want me to be there for you? Or do you want my advice? Do you see it? You've flipped it, right? Yeah. You've given them their power, their feeling of control. That does a lot to decrease anxiety and, build resiliency and confidence and agency, right? And so one of the big things that I tell parents as their kids are transitioning into adolescence and young adulthood, your role is changed. You were their life manager before, and you're not their life manager now. You're going to sit in the passenger seat, and your adolescent young adult is going to sit in the driver's seat, and how you can help them through, learning from the process is the most important thing. So zip up your mouth, listen, and when they want to hear your words, then you talk. Be Alfred the butler from Batman. That's one of my favorite analogies. The kids might not know, but remember how Alfred always came out from behind the curtains for Batman? And I was always amazed. He always had what Batman needed. And that's our role as, parents or teachers and coaches, supporters of adolescents and young adults and children, is that to be there when you need them. But this is not about you. And if they're having a moment, it's also not about you. It's about them. And if you look at that way, you won't take it as personally. And also to know that you're here as the butler, or not in any kind of a bad way or anything. You're here, you're available when they need you on their own terms, not on your terms. And you can model that, right? So and we've talked about how parents are so integral in this, and some parents didn't have the parenting where their needs were met. So, but they can, with a little help from you, they can learn how to meet their children's needs. And it comes back to pausing, listening, and then being available for their child or their young adult.
So I want to just say this again, because I know many of you have said this, but even teenagers and young adults need their parents still. They want that, even though they may act otherwise, it still comes down to needing you there in the corner, at least knowing that you're going to be there as their safety net as they, start spreading their wings. So, Dr. Gretchen.
So I was just listening to you guys and thinking about, so one of the tools that I give parents that helps, because it's in that moment. Like a lot of times parents, when they're in a calm state, they get it. They understand they need to just be there and listen, and the child's growing up, and they get the importance of all these things. But in the moment, when their teenager who has experienced trauma comes storming in and is yelling at them, they just yell back. And so they need like a specific tool. So the one that I often say is just take a big deep breath and validate. And for the parents who haven't had anybody ever validate anything for them before, it sounds so strange. Like, why would I say that? Nobody's ever said anything like that to me. But it can be so healing. And instead of yelling back and saying, "Stop yelling at me, young lady," the parent instead says, "Oh, wow, you seem really angry. I understand you're angry. After a day like you had, anybody would be angry. It's totally normal to be angry." And so you validate the feeling. And parents are like, "Oh my gosh, but does that mean I'm saying it's okay to be angry?" I'm like, that's a whole nother question we'll have another time. But right now what you're doing is just validating. So just teaching parents to validate in the moment, validate the feeling, and then don't yell.
I am totally stealing that one.
I was going to say, a saying I use a lot with parents: before you get furious, get curious.
Yes.
And oftentimes, if we just take a moment to ask the obvious questions and get kids talking and processing what's going on, instead of reacting defensively, they'll express it, and they'll oftentimes figure out the solution for themselves.
Yeah, I love that. And it's sort of reminiscent of the podcast episode that I had with Dr. King, where we talked about, connection before compliance. I think sometimes when we get lost in those shouting matches and we're feeling dysregulated and nothing is, it just keeps amping up. I mean, you can always pull back at any time, especially when you're realizing that. Just like stop and go for the hug, go for the, the touch, go for the, like, "I'm so sorry,"
Yeah, that's actually the tool that I use. I am definitely using both of those things that you guys said, but when it comes to toddlers and teenagers especially, I use, and I stole this from someone else, I use Q-tip, which is like, quit taking it personally. This isn't about you as a parent. Whatever they're doing is about their adolescent development or their toddlerhood development. And so as soon as you see that, as soon as you feel activated or, you get upset about whatever they're doing, that's when you take a step back and Q-tip and you're like, you know what? This is about them. This isn't about me. This is about 10,000 other toddlers having a fit because they asked for toast and you gave them toast. This is about a teenager doing an incredibly teenagery thing, which is disagreeing with their parent or whatever it is. As soon as you identify, well, are other teenagers doing this right now? Then this is something they just do. But I just love the validate too, because I think that teenagers need so much validation, so much chance to be their own person and to be told that their ideas are good and other things. So I love that. I wanted to say one other thing, which is if you look at the 2021 policy statement that Andy Garner wrote, who I'm a huge fan of, he has the primary, secondary, and tertiary interventions for people with trauma to really be be positive about it, be strengths-based about our approaches. And I am thrilled with the primary interventions that he has, because they're all about teaching about play and reach out and read and things that I really love. But what I've realized during my practice is that if you actually have to jump up to the secondary level most of the time, which is identify people at risk. Because if I talk about reach out and read to someone whose stress level is like up here, none of those things are going to do any good. So really, really identifying people who meeting them where they are with their own stress level. And I always think about the truck with all of the boxes on the top of it. Like, we need to be recognizing when parents are carrying too much of a load to do what they need to do, and really work to unload the boxes in any way, shape, or form that we're able to do, connecting them with services, getting them mental health treatment, getting them financial support. Once we're able to unload some of the boxes off of the parents, then they're going to be more able to hear about how to play with their child and how to Q-tip with their child and how to, stop and think before they act, because that's how we all are in times of crisis, in times of feeling like we're drowning. And so just, I really think it says primary intervention, but jump up to that secondary line real quick and make sure you've screened for where they are. And then I just want to say one other thing, which is if there are any primary care providers out there, I see you. Okay. This is a hard time for all of us right now. We are stressed to the max too. So I'm just giving a shout out to anyone that's taking care of young kids in the medical setting, in the early childhood setting, teachers everywhere in the world. I see you. And this has been a really hard last 3 to 4 years. So I'm acknowledging your own stress.
Yes.
Got to run.
Yes.
Thank you so much, ladies, and really enjoyed it. And I hope your audience found it helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Fred. Thanks for joining. So in our last minute or so, because I know we're over time, but I do want to give all of you one last chance for your one last kind of word of wisdom and where people can find you if they want to connect, follow you on social media and such. So Dr. King, we'll start with you.
Sure. You can find me on all the social media channels at Dr. Amy LLC, and my website, dramyllc.com. Super easy to find me. But I guess just my last parting thing is just looking at your connected people in your life. And if you don't have some of those primary people in your life that are supportive and connected, it's critical for your health and for your child's health. And so find those people first. I talk about that often in my newsletter. So yeah, those people are the people that are determining your long-term health for you and for your kids.
Yes. Thank you for that. And if you're not subscribing to Dr. King's emails, you should. They are very good and very valuable. So I really appreciate the content that you put into putting those newsletters together. Thank you. Alicia.
So my business name is Strengthening Families LLC. So you can find me there. And like I said, I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana. We're up on the northeast side of Indianapolis. I guess one of the things I would just say is that, and families can attest to this when this hasn't been their course that they have taken. But I just can't stress enough that if you're an adoptive family and you're working with adoptive families or whatever the case might be, you're teaching an adopted child, is that you really need to make sure that they're seeing a provider who's trained in adoption. It really does make a difference, and that they understand the nuances of adoption and how different that is, and the things that we know about that. I'll just give one quick example. It's just that coming out of the work of TCU, just to even know that children who come from hard places, which is their current coined word when we're talking about trauma, that 18 out of 20 children who come from hard places are more likely to have sensory processing issues. And so when I see children, I'm already screening for that in my head because I know what the research says about that when we're talking about adoption and trauma. So that's just a really small incident of just what I mean when we really need to make sure that people are getting to the right people when they're an adoptive family, for sure.
Yes, thank you. And again, thank you for the work that you do. I know that you work with others in your practice. I mean, I know your wait lists are long, but you are well worth the wait. And so thank you so much for the hard work that you put in and work with these families. It's often a tough road and it's not a quick fix, but I mean, I think part of it is your approach, your understanding, and the sensitivity to what every family brings to the table and getting to know them as a family unit and then supporting everybody. So thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Gretchen.
Thank you. So I can be found on most of the social media outlets, TikTok and YouTube and Facebook and Instagram. And it's either my name, Dr. Gretchen Pianka, or at 123 Resiliency. Those are my two ways to find me if you're interested. So, and my one little last snippet, I loved what Dr. Shriver said about the Q-tip thing, but is trying to talk about, if you listen to that list of 7 positive childhood experiences and felt overwhelmed, I would say just focus on number 1, which is feeling able to talk about your feelings with your family. And what goes wrong, what goes sideways for most families when they try to do that is Johnny says, Mom, I'm so worried. I'm so worried. I'm so worried. And Mom says, well, there's nothing to be worried about. So unintentionally dismissing what the child is saying, largely because Mom's probably stressed out and worried and, herself. And so she's like, I just can't deal. So instead of trying to kind of fix the feeling or make it go away quickly, instead just validate it. So of course you're worried. Wow, today was like one of those weird days where nothing went right. It's totally normal to feel worried. Do you want to talk about it? And so opening that up and trying to talk about feelings. And if something comes up in you and you're like, I just can't deal with this, big deep breath. Maybe you could even say, first I'm going to get a cup of tea and then I'm going to come and sit with you and I want to hear about your day or something like that. So if you need to integrate self-care, that's good too.
Yes. Thank you for giving us the script. I mean, I think it's really important. We can say validate, but you really recognize the fact that, it is a skill that you have to practice. It feels strange to some families, especially if they haven't been raised in that way, but also giving yourself permission to say, you know what, I got to go get something in the other room. Take your deep breaths while you're doing that, regroup and come back. So thank you, as always, for giving those scripts. And please do follow her on social media. She is a brave woman going on TikTok and all these different platforms. I am so proud of everything that you are doing in those bite-sized, chunks. So it's really accessible. So go follow her, please, and look for her book that's coming out.
Thank you.
Dr. Shriver.
Well, thank you so much, Nerissa, for having me on. And also, Dr. Gretchen, thanks for I've been writing everything down about validation. And, I was reflecting, I did some therapy for myself. And the number one best thing about my therapist was how she validated my feelings. And so that just really resonates with me. And I hope I do that with my kids. I'd like someone independently to take a survey for them to see if I'm doing it right. But my message is about, first of all, to teens and to kids, it's okay not to be okay. And so I'm actually one of the things that I think we touched upon during the pandemic is that it made it more obvious that it was okay not to be okay. We started talking about mental health as something that is part of our overall health and really important to address. Although there are still mountains and mountains of barriers for kids not only to talk about mental health, but also then to get appropriate mental health. So what I want to say is that when we as providers, especially primary care providers, but really anyone that kind of has the whole health of the child in mind, is that when we approach any visit with our child or any moment a therapeutic moment with our child, we need to really be thinking, what is getting in the way of your ideal health right now? What are the barriers, whether they're mental health barriers or financial barriers or relationship barriers or many barriers that are out there, so many barriers, and how can we walk through those together? And specifically when it comes to mental health barriers, I want to empower anybody that if your mental health is getting in the way of your overall health, then acknowledge it and lean into it. And don't just hope it goes away or feel shame about it, because shame is not necessary in this scenario, nor is it helpful. So I like to always make the reference to Captain Marvel, because if you've seen Captain Marvel, she like has these amazing powers, but throughout most of the movie, she was muted because she had a little chip that was implanted in her by some evil people. And once she actually identified that the chip was holding her back from her full, amazing, awesome powers, she pulled out the chip and she like leaned into it and she crushed it in between her fingers. And then she became this fully actualized, amazing superhero. So that's what I tell teens is like, find your chip and then lean into your chip, get your team around you to help you crush your chip. And just really, don't hesitate to lean into this and do all of the things. I know that Dr. King, I know Alicia, I know Gretchen, I know Terry, you guys all have things that you tell people to do when they're going through mental health problems. So just do all of the things, do all of them. And something is going to stick, something will help. And then remember the pattern of our lives. It goes down and then it goes back up. And I think it's really hard to see the up when you're in the down. So if you tell yourself beforehand that that's just everybody's pattern, I think that there's always hope existing, even if you can't feel it.
Yes.
Oh, and where do you find me? I guess.
Yes. Where do we find you?
I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And I'm Dr. Amy Shriver, or Shriver_Amy.
I was going to say, I didn't know you were on TikTok yet. You almost said TikTok there.
Do I have TikTok? Yes. I only go there to follow Bunny the dog, and that is all.
Oh, and Dr. Terry, and then I'll wrap up. So thank you.
Well, thank you. There's nothing, I don't think there's very much left that hasn't been said from these amazing women. So my thing to the parents is, you are modeling for your kids, and it's okay to be imperfect as a parent, because life is imperfect. And that's when things are imperfect, that's when we all learn. Use that opportunity as a teaching moment for your child. Like if you lose your crap on them, say, later on, say, I'm sorry. Okay. Because then you're taking ownership, right? And say, I'm really sorry. Mommy had a stressful day, and mommy gets, irritated, angry also, but it wasn't meant for you. It was, I had misplaced my emotion or, my feelings, and you just happened to be there. So that's a great learning opportunity. So even when we make mistakes, we can reframe it and help our children learn from it, because then they know that we're not infallible, but we can help maneuver ourselves to come back from it, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm the ideal mommy or daddy is not ever going to lose their mind. I'm sorry. At 6 o'clock at night, everybody is going to lose their mind, right? Dinner's not coming fast enough. Everybody has been done. Every reserve that you have in your body is gone from your child and from you also. Mm-hmm. So, cut yourself some grace and show your child, how do you recover from that loss of grace moment? I think that is models so many things, right? That you're human, you make mistakes, you own them, you apologize, and you move forward. And I think that's just that's the way kids learn, is monkey see, monkey do. So, okay, you did it and you feel terrible. You're going to call, a family member or a friend and say, oh my God, I blew it. It's okay. It's how you recover. That's resilience, is how you recover, right? Yeah. And that's what your child is going to learn from you. So I always say to my parents, to love your adolescent or young adult is to listen to them and let them be. Let them make those mistakes. Don't say, I told you so. Just be there when you need them, when they need you. Mm-hmm. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. Oh, and how do you find me? So I am not on TikTok. I have an account, but I am not posting. I just feel too intimidated by the time limits. So
same.
Wow. Go Gretchen. Really? Nerissa, I think that you could be awesome on it. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, and it's Dr. Terry Nguyen, TerrynGuyen, or resilientmd.org. And very recently started a podcast where I work. I work in a hospital, no, what did we call ourselves now? I don't know, healthcare system. Yeah. And I just started a practical parenting podcast. So you can find me on Spotify also.
Love that.
Practical parenting. We did toddler temper tantrums, and the most recent episode is adolescent angst.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we got to subscribe and follow and listen to these awesome. Congratulations on the podcast. So,
Oh, thanks.
yeah. Yeah.
And I got my workplace to do it.
Wow. So for those of you who are still hanging on to the very last end, I am so grateful that you all tuned in. And again, you can watch this on replay. I hope you do share this. It is available as soon as I hit end broadcast. So it's on my YouTube channel and on my Facebook page. And we will be sharing the link live with all of our guests so that they can rebroadcast it. So please know that sharing is caring. I do want to just remind everybody I'm at Let's Talk Kids Health. And thank you for joining us. I would say that my one takeaway point is, going back to that validation, something I also like to teach kids and parents is to learn how to just say, tell me more about that, or, like if you don't know what to say, you can just do those two things. And it just gets you more time to be like, but I also teach them in my course, being detectives. Let's try to figure out what this emotion or behavior is trying to tell us without judgment, without shame. Let's just try to put our heads together, be non-judgmental, and be like, I wonder what's happening here. What's going on today? Like you're having a hard time right now. I can see that. I'm here to help. I'm here to understand. I'm here to listen. But do you want, advice? Do you want me to listen? So again, just remembering to be a detective, get curious. And you can also use that analogy with your kids when they're upset and you're like, I have no idea what's going on here, but I think we need to figure out what's happening. Let's get our detective hats on and figure out how we can work together. So, you guys, I am just so grateful to each and every one of you. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being in my sphere and for saying yes to being on tonight. What a wonderful conversation. Thank you, everybody, and good night.